Beyond Resilience is a series of curated conversations created by Firelight.
Beyond Resilience does a lot to keep people connected and keep people talking about films or talking about issues, connecting our filmmakers and other filmmakers together.
We wanted to create a space where our community, that is BIPOC documentary filmmakers, could lead a conversation.
We have to do a better job of knowing that films aren't just what we can physically see on the screen. It's about the people that put in the blood, sweat, and tears behind the scenes.
Knowing that what you're so passionate about, someone looks at as unmarketable or niche. Who's the audience for this? Who's going to care about this, right? And those simple things that people say are like daggers to you.
I think that is the part of the violence of the model minority shit, that it like shaves away our history of resistance, of rebellion, of ferocity.
We have always resisted. We have always fought back in many different forms.
It's an evolving form. You have to evolve or not you will stagnate.
You have to have intention to change, and you have to understand that you're not changing to try to give anybody a gift, but you're changing so that you can do your job better.
What we're asking for is just proportional access, proportional resources, proportional marketing money, so that it does actually meet its mission, so that it does actually lean into the diversity of perspectives.
I hope that Beyond Resilience will keep its edge, will keep pushing the boundaries of the conversations that we need to have, and will keep growing its audiences, pulling in new people from the industry, outside the industry. It continues to be a space where people can have a BIPOC creator-led conversation. That is what it's about.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Monika Navarro. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's Beyond Resilience event on behalf of Firelight Media. I am a medium brown woman wearing silver wire-rimmed glasses and silver hoop earrings. I have medium-length black hair and have kind of a blurred background behind me. There's some art. And I joined this event from Brooklyn on the land of the Lenape and Canarsie people. At Firelight Media, we stand in solidarity with Indigenous people worldwide and like to remind our audience about Indigenous sovereignty and land rights. I encourage you to follow the link in the chat to learn more about whose ancestral lands you are joining this event from. I also invite you to introduce yourself and share your own land acknowledgement in the chat. Our Beyond Resilience event today is presented in partnership with the Documentary Producers Alliance and is focused on the power of the independent BIPOC producer. For this conversation, we are focusing on independent producers who are contracted from film to film rather than producers who are employed by studios or networks. Indie BIPOC producers are critical to the field. They provide key creative input on stories from underrepresented communities, staff productions with truly diverse crews, target new funding sources for experimental projects, and more. They do it themselves or with a very small team, and many of them are struggling to do this very important work. As an independent producer noted in our Beyond Resilience event, Let's Talk Money, these producers are under-resourced and under-supported, and as a result, they are increasingly leaving the field in search of a more sustainable career. It's my hope that today's conversation, which features a panel of esteemed producers, provides insights on how to make a life as an indie doc producer, how to claim space and bring value, and finally, how to bring more underrepresented stories from across our communities onto your screens. I want to thank our partners, the Documentary Producers Alliance, who pitched today's event, for collaborating with us. If you don't know, the DPA is a nonprofit coalition of nearly 600 international documentary producers. I'm one of them, ranging from emerging and early career producers to established and Academy Award-winning producers. The DPA works to amplify the voice of documentary producers worldwide while educating the industry about producers' essential role from development through financing, production, and distribution. For more on the DPA, click the link in the chat. A special thank you to our beloved ASL interpreter, Andrea Lust, to Jean-Pierre Regis, our series producer, and to Justin Sherwood, our senior communications director. and to our DPA collaborators from its Equity and Inclusion Committees, Erica L. Taylor, Ian Kibbe, and Nicole Docta. For closed caption services, please see the lower right-hand corner of your YouTube screen. And as always, thank you to our ongoing Beyond Resilience series supporters, including Open Society Foundations, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Field Division for making these conversations possible. We sincerely thank you. You can support the Beyond Resilience series and conversations like this by making a tax-deductible donation via the link in the chat. And now I will pass it on to our moderator for this conversation, Geeta Gandbhir, who as a director, showrunner, and vocal supporter of this industry has worked with many a great producer and will likely have some great stories for this panel. For more on Geeta, if you don't know, now you know, see the chat below for her extended bio and visit Firelight's website at www.firelightmedia.tv. Geeta, I'll hand it to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Monika, and I'm really looking forward to this critical conversation. Joining me today are producers Lorenz Grant, Nicole Docta, and Robinder Uppal, and you can find more information, all of them in the chat, and extended bios on the Firelight website. And I am a brown woman sitting in an office, a makeshift office, and I have silver hair to my shoulders, and I'm wearing a blue shirt and glasses. And we're going to jump right in, you all. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here with my colleagues, and I feel like this is a really pressing. The sort of talking about producing in today's market is a really pressing issue. And so I'm excited to learn from all these brilliant folks as well. So I'm going to throw out a question to all my panelists, which is that for so long, the industry has often prized directors over producers and broader teams. So what is critical exactly about the work of a BIPOC producer in making the films we watch even possible? And whoever wants to start, please do. And if you don't start, I'm calling on you. All right, go ahead, Lorenz.
I'll jump in. Producing is really what I call making it happen. And especially in today's landscape, where imagery and point of view really matter. I think that's really the crucial work of where a BIPOC producer can come in. I want to describe myself. My name is Lorenz Grant, African-American woman. I'm wearing headsets and a black t-shirt, and I have long braids. So I think our point of view is more crucial than ever. It's always been crucial to tell our stories or just to have a backbone of understanding to some of the content that a lot of people sometimes just miss, not even through malice. For example, if you're on a project and you're just careening through deadlines and rough cuts and trying to finish, and a producer can look at it and say, oh, what about X issue? What about women's voices? What about BIPOC voices? What about, et cetera, et cetera? What about voices from, say, a rural community or wherever, depending on the subject that you're working on? That's some of the deep work that a BIPOC producer can do. And I think maybe the landing or leaning on the director is, of course, the director shapes the vision of whatever film you're working on. But I think now, because the resources are quote unquote scarce or the market is under such turmoil, I think, one could argue that, we're going through this maybe a Hollywoodization of the documentary landscape. And so people want to lean on the name recognition or the name brand of a director. And that's why sometimes, they're getting more quote unquote famous directors to do more projects, because everyone's just dying and needs eyeballs. They need to measure receipts, in a way that we didn't have to measure in documentary. Before it was always discussed as the long tail. If something has a long reach in a community worldwide or schools or the educational system, then that was doing really great work and lasting work of a documentary. But now they want instant results in almost everything. So I think that is probably why there's this race to maybe name recognition, sometimes a race to maybe even lean in on directors. Certainly that's important, but maybe in ways that don't need to certainly short circuit the importance of producers, particularly BIPOC producers.
And that's all of that again, so valid, and leads to the next question, which I'm going to throw out to my other two panelists, which is really about sustainability too. Can we talk about sustainability and your thoughts on that for BIPOC producers, in, again, pre this kind of grim market and now post?
I can jump in. I'm Nicole Docta. I'm an Asian woman sitting in an office space with some plants and pictures in the background. I have medium length black hair and I'm wearing a red shirt. Sustainability can be talked about in, money and career sustainability, but also like mental and burnout. And I just wanted to mention that like so many projects focus on our trauma that we really need to make sure that we take care of ourselves. And oftentimes as producers, we're also expected to do a bulk of the work, both creatively and logistically. And burnout is real. A lot of documentary producers, especially in the indie BIPOC space, just have all these weights on their shoulders. And I just want to make sure that it's a part of all of our practices that we not only take care of the rest of the crew, but find care for ourselves in order to be able to do this important work. And in terms of career sustainability, I feel like I've really been in this unique social justice space so that the market before compared to now, I have always been operating in this DIY sort of model. And we sort of set the model that other people are now starting to take. And I feel like because the industry in like the commercial world, like the bigger projects are finding it harder to find distribution and support, that now we're seeing them appear trying to use the resources that we have typically been using. So I'm still doing what I've been doing all along, but now I'm finding a little bit more competition for those same resources.
No, Nicole, 100%. You have some really large Hollywood names kind of going for the grants that have traditionally been, again, grants for doc filmmakers who are trying to, to piece together financing. And that, yeah, that's an interesting turn of events, with the market shifting. And so I'm going to ask my next question, which is that how do you all feel that the perception of, I think we all agree that, directors get a lot of the, the spotlight and sort of the accolades and the pressure to kind of, bring their name and branding to projects in this climate and even a little bit prior. But how does the perception or role of the producer need to shift to better reflect a producer's artistry and craft and also their significance? Nothing is made without a great producer.
Robinder,
that's you.
Yeah, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Robinder Uppal. I am a brown man with short black hair and a large black beard, and I'm sitting in a wood-paneled office. I think, the importance of producers can't be emphasized enough. And I think after you've been around a few films and seen a few films to completion, you realize how totally instrumental they are to the whole process. Films don't get made without producers, and they certainly don't get seen without producers. I think that's part of what we need to acknowledge, is that it's not just about the act of making a film. It's about what happens before, how do people actually get paid, how do people actually sustain a life, and then where does the film go afterwards? And there's so much more than just what's contained within the actual narrative of a film that is involved in that. And I think starting to value that more, I think the DPA is doing a really good job of sort of clarifying, what do producers do, what are their roles, what are expectations for things like payment, for compensation, that help us advocate for ourselves, and also to just have baselines in an industry that really operates a lot of times, sometimes with not that much transparency in terms of what people are actually getting paid. There's a lot of, not sharing of budgets sometimes, and I think that's starting to change. I think people are starting to talk more about what actually costs to make a film. And I think, that's that's the most important thing, is actually having a cultural shift where producers are being acknowledged for their creativity, and for, I think, effective producers bring such an enormous amount of knowledge that is derived from experience that you can't replace. And they're so instrumental. And I think just acknowledging that in conversations like this, but also in budgets, in the industry at large, I think is really important.
And you just mentioned, so just to play off of your mentioning of budgets, are there creative ways? Can you all talk about creative ways that indie producers structure production deals that can set them up financially? I'm wondering if you all have any tips. And Nicole, you mentioned that you've been doing this way forever, you know, so.
And I just happen to have this little handy tote here that the DPA put out. They just released some guidelines for contracting. And I think that, you know, financially, we need to make money, but also we need to make sure that these are the right projects and that we're being hired not in a token way, and that we're being fairly compensated and credited. And so the tote says to carry this with you, and has, you know, some of those things listed on here, like don't work for free, don't work out without a contract, don't let others work without a contract, vet the project and the people hiring you, consider trial periods, know your limits and take care of yourself. And that's something that I kind of learned the hard way by working for some people that did sort of tokenize me. And it's just important to like go to the resources that are out there that have been created to know these things going into it. And there's always a time you can always step away, right? Things change. You know, funding comes, funding runs out. You just need to have open and honest communication, because we're in a creative space, but this is a job as well. So it's just being honest with yourself and your needs, and with the crew's needs and the project's needs and the resources that are finite. I also just wanted to shout out Firelight for letting producers apply to their funding. I think that that is a big culture change that Firelight has initiated. You know, directors are usually the ones that have to apply for grants, but Firelight really considers experience in other roles towards your career, and producers can apply on behalf of projects. So like, we should have other grants that do that.
That's thank you for that. No, that's so important. And I just want to give the other panelists, do you have anything that you want to mention on this topic? Just sort of the actual tips on structuring production deals that can set folks up financially.
You know, that's one thing about documentary, sort of the beauty and the bane, if you will. There's no template, there's no model. And I always feel like each project you have to, you know, almost reinvent the wheel. You know, sure, sometimes you can get the one grant and it just magically pays for everything and then you're set. But, you know, that seems, you know, more and more rare, that you just have to not only cobble together finances as you go, but that is even shifting how you cobble, who you cobble from, when do you cobble those resources, and then what's the strategy? And there's always, of course, because if people, you know, are investing money, they want to know what's their catch, what are they getting? So you have to completely move and pivot and strategize, literally to screening, to premiere. You know, there isn't this seemingly this moment like, okay, all the funds are raised, go and make it, and then we premiere. It's literally always in funding and, you know, and pivoting. You know, obviously piggybacking on what Nicole said, certainly those things are very important. And I think because there were so many people in the industry who felt, I mean, anecdotally, you know, we know so many sob stories. They, you know, finally got all the funding, and then the filmmakers themselves didn't get a dime. You know, just the investors got all the money because they had to recoup their investment. So I think because there were so many of these tales, over the years that now people are being made more aware of them, and in truth, and knowing what to ask for, because sometimes maybe filmmakers just get caught in the, oh, I'm just so happy to be doing something, I'll help out, I'm working, sure, no problem, we'll make the deal when it comes together, I'm just so committed, I just want to help us get launched and off our feet. And then let's say you do get launched and off your feet, and then somehow that role that you were doing is now given to someone else, perhaps, or because you didn't have anything codified, or you thought, oh, I don't want to, be a hard-nosed person and do that. But now, a lawyer is your friend. Yeah, quote unquote, it's expensive, but it's not nearly as expensive as the hurt and the pain. So you just have to, there just is no one template. You have to kind of literally think of the landscape and pivot with it accordingly. And then now I'm hearing the new, oh, licensing costs that much? Oh, okay. And so now the films are being shelved. So, there's just constantly this churn happening. And so as doc filmmakers, we always have to pivot and be ready. But that's, I think, in some ways our resilience and our resistance, because we always have to find a way, with so many challenges thrown at us, you just, as the producer, you got to make it happen, and you figure out how to make it happen. Sometimes it takes longer than you like. Sometimes you may have to shelve something, come back later, or sometimes you get lucky and you hit it right off out of the gate. That is the part of the resilience.
And I think persistence being the key word too,
Yes.
right? Persistence. And I think there's a question that just came in. But at minimum, should producers expect a day rate? Is this something like, I think there was a question of like, I think Nicole, you said it, like the don't work for free. Like, what can producers put in place for themselves, from the beginning, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to have a contract, but even more than a day rate, I think, just picking up on the last question, it's so important to be realistic about budgets. And when you're looking at a budget, especially when you're starting out, it's hard to imagine that you might be working on a film for 2 or 3 or 4 years. But that is the more realistic timeline than 1 year. And people don't think about that on their first films frequently, and that's part of the burnout, is if you're not getting paid at all or enough for your first film, you're going to have a real problem continuing in the field. So I think being realistic about how long something is going to take, and actually putting those numbers into budgets and seeing if the film holds up under those stresses, rather than being quite, let's say, fantastical with how long a film takes to make, or how much money you'll need to get to the end of it. I think the DPA has also just released some really good guidelines on some numbers based on budget that I think everyone should look at. In terms of how much people need to be paid on a hourly, monthly kind of basis, which is really helpful to set standards that are, somewhat sustainable, or that allow people to have a living without, going on their credit cards and things like that.
And I know this may seem really 101, but can you just tell us, what is the DPA? Just so folks really to know what it is.
DPA is the Documentary Producers Alliance, and they are, I believe, they're helping co-sponsor this event, and I'm a member. I don't participate daily in a lot of activities, but they are great advocates for producers, and they have put out 2 sets of documents, I think, that everyone who's in the industry should take a look at. Their contract guidelines, which are new, and the crediting guidelines, which also help clarify some of the waterfall and other things that you may not be thinking about if you're new, but that everyone, it's just very good to have these kinds of standards. Yeah,
that's, I know that's super helpful, and thank you for that. And I want to ask a question about so we talked a little bit, and we might come back to it, but the importance of why it's our representation is so important on the producerial level. But on the flip side, some producers have been in production environments where they feel pigeonholed, into working only on projects that are of the racial, ethnic, and identity group that they belong to. And has this happened to any of you? Have you also felt like you were pigeonholed in any way, or excluded from projects? Again, because of your ethnicity, your race, even your gender. Anyone want to take it? Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, I've definitely worked in a production that I felt I was hired. I thought I was hired due to the merits of my experience, but in fact, it was because I was a person of color, and I just added that demographic to the crew, and then they were pleasantly surprised that I actually did a good job, which is, backwards, right? As producers, as we hire people, we need to do our due diligence, not only on the crew that we hire, but also on the people who are looking to hire us. The industry is small. We know so many of each other. We just need to reach out to our networks to really check on people. And sometimes what people don't say is as much as what they do say. And we need to protect each other. I don't feel like in terms of subject matter, I've been pigeonholed because I do enjoy the subjects that I pick. I'm really specific about the projects that I pick and try to focus on ones that have a lot of potential for impact. So, there's a certain amount of control that you have in your public image on what projects that you have done, but also, just be vocal about that as well when you're talking to potential collaborators in the future about what you want to work on.
I think so this leads me to the next question. How are you evaluating projects? This is really important for producers to understand. What questions are important to ask yourself or the director or the EP before agreeing to join? And how can you ensure, or you just said you should do your due diligence. How do you do that to understand if it is a tokenism hire or how you're going to be treated? So you mentioned some of these things, Nicole, but I'd love to hear from folks about this.
Now that there's so many more entities in the space, I kind of feel like maybe this question is almost pre-streaming and, post-streaming perhaps, because like you said, the documentary world is somewhat small, and frankly, the industries were really just thriving in just certain even regions of the country. And there were just certain entities that were able to produce enough to have enough output. And you could get a sense of who these industries were and ask around and do your own due diligence. Now, people are, creating these LLCs left and right. It's kind of like they do, in the feature film world. They're doing similarly in the documentary space, or there's people who weren't in the documentary space before, but now they're entering into it. And so it still behooves you to do the due diligence, but it's not the same landscape. And I think overall to the betterment, because there's just more opportunity, there's more people doing it, more people looking for people to partner with different types of people, more different types of topics. And so with that, being a member of various collectives and associations is like a perfect place to start, because your kin, your brethren, whether you're Producers Guild or the Doc Guild or within Firelight or IDA, etc. You can talk to other filmmakers and find out, hey, if you work for such and such an entity, what are they like? And you can, of course, do your own due diligence and see what other projects they've worked on. Because now when people do work on a bunch of projects, they have a reputation and kind of a niche. And a lot of people, especially those that are thriving, may have their sort of quote unquote commercial end side of things and then their documentary side of things. And so you want to see, is that going to align with what you want to work on? Is it going to align with the subject matter? Is it going to align with how they work? How is it an entity that just basically they're just trying to crank out projects really quickly, or and it just so happens that this one is speaking to a broader audience and has some outreach, or is it an entity that's really has put their flag in that and wants to make quote unquote meaningful work? And so now you, as the person who's going to go work for them, do that homework, because in some ways it does fall on you if you join the project like, oh my God, it's it's not how I thought, it's a nightmare, or oh, it's amazing. Asking around will go a long way, and I think truly in thinking the glass half full side of things, sometimes people just don't know. They've been in the industry, but maybe they've not really been in the documentary space or the feature length documentary space or the doc series space, and are looking for our insights, our expertise, and offer it, provide it, find, we also have to find our voice. And for me, that was something that was over time. I didn't have a manual that said, here is your voice, day one, this is how you speak, this is how you ask for this and this, this is how you negotiate your salary, this is how you negotiate your credit. I had to just figure out all of that, on my own and asking other people, but you have to figure that out and your voice and what's going to be comfortable to you. And that said, the last point, because there's so much also being done, you have to find your own compass and let your own sort of radar and compass and ethics drive you as well, because now that's as well all over the map. So you, also can look at that to find your way and to help you choose and select what types of projects and what types of entities you want to work with.
And that leads me to my next question. Robinder, I want to ask you about so the hiring and sort of the pipeline problem we have in documentaries. So how do you as a producer go about consciously staffing diverse production crews, particularly on films featuring BIPOC protagonists? Like, I think too, once we are often put in the role of producer, then, it's our job to kind of figure out who we're working with.
Yeah, I think using the resources, I think Lauren was mentioning some of these groups that we can be part of and that are, great resources. I think the Brown Girls Doc Mafia has a great list that, is a great resource for people who are looking to staff their films. I think we've seen these organizations come out in the last few years. I know that for me, Firelight is huge. ADOC, the Asian American Documentary Network, is really huge. I just joined that organization a few weeks ago, actually. And already there's, just an enormous amount of sharing resources. I think watching films that are recommended in those channels and getting a taste for the actual creative work of other BIPOC creators, seeing what their voice is as editors, as cinematographers, and keeping those things in mind as you go through is really important, and trying to build up people who are doing excellent work, of which there are many. I think at this point there's so much networking happening that's relatively new that I think there are ways forward where you can actually staff a whole production without too much difficulty if you're trying.
I love that. No, that makes, and thank you for listing all those organizations. Obviously there's many that have been doing power building through the years, and again, have been incredible resources for folks. And so I want to, Nicole, I want to ask you, you produced our own Lawyer Limbo's Through the Night, which went on to win a DuPont Award. And what was special or different about that experience, given that it was led by an all BIPOC team?
It was really eye-opening. And even the team that I spent some time working with at Firelight, there's just a shorthand because we have all experienced, systemic racism within the industry and been confused by another person that has like maybe a little bit of the similar qualities as us. And we really have to like fight to be fight a little extra to be recognized and remembered and given credit. And so working with Loida, who is a wonderful creative and visionary and activist, it was just an amazingly open space to feel appreciated and collaborative and seen in ways that I hadn't quite recognized that I wanted before. I do work with other directors who are similarly amazing and creative, but I do have to explain some of these viewpoints and lived experiences that I've had that they will never have and don't quite understand and don't quite recognize in the same way. So it was very uplifting in that way.
Thank you for that. And then Lorenzo, I want to ask you, because you've expanded your scope from being a producer, a consulting producer, to being a director and a showrunner. And you are on the upcoming Max show For All Humankind with Trevor Noah attached. So can you talk about that transition? Like, again, from producer to director to showrunner, How did that work? And, what did being a producer teach you for all those positions?
I would say, I think what prepared me overall is I really am a trained journalist and I have to ask questions. And I just had really, really demanding editors. And my first job into the documentary space was the director apparently didn't like talking to people. And he literally asked me, "Do you like talking?" And I was like, "Is this a real question? Like, does the sun rise?" Like, yes. So I was sort of out front and the gatekeeper and having to, quote unquote, book the show and having to, I had to learn all these terms, booking the show, how to set up a shot, what is a key light, all of that. I had to learn the shorthand. And I actually didn't necessarily prescribe the route. Now you can study, get a master's in documentary filmmaking. You can get a master's in even social documentary making. You can choose your path as a director or producer. And because I was a writer and a journalist, it ended up, I was funneled in the producer path because I started as an associate producer. And the hardest part, I think, of that is absorbing so much, and there's no real manual. I love quoting, I love going to her panel discussions, Christine Vachon, and she's quoting somebody else who said, producing is the hardest thing to teach. You can't really teach producing, but you can learn it. And that is true. You kind of learn by doing. And when, I just noticed all the grit and sweat that went into it, and especially if you're a creative producer, it was fun. I'm like, well, I want to be behind the camera. I'm already doing all that work anyway and looking at the cuts and making the suggestions and etc. So then stepping into that director space, then you really have to realize the big shift is, I would say it's mental. You have to own being a director and own the decisions and make decisions. And then as I learned, someone told me, it's hard to let go. When you're a producer, like my shorthand was, does it matter what font the call sheet is in? No, just as long as everybody shows up, let go of all that granular micro detail. So that's probably the hardest if you're shifting from producing to directing, because you have in your head, how you want to do things, how things can happen, how you set up the shot, where you want to go, well, I actually know how much that costs, because you're not doing that. You are directing. Focus on the vision. And I think the industry shift helped, because now things became multi-part or multi-hour. And then that term came along with it as show running. And so with the For All Humankind project, it was, kind of the themes that I've loved to do and have worked on, sort of the civil rights and activism and, space. Or really, as I jokingly say, the world is coming apart, make a film and go. And it's like I had to figure it out. It was like a film basically about the same week that George Floyd was killed. All the space billionaires finally figured out and got their rockets into space. Is that a societal dichotomy or what? So, what does that say? Just us about humankind, us about, society, about progression, advancement, non-advancement, et cetera, et cetera. And so those are all the themes to try and weave into a film. And then learning what is the term and how to work, really working with multiple teams and multiple entities. I guess that's probably the biggest other physical direct shift when you are show running, because if you're, you really have to manage multiple teams. But you're still having to be creative. And depending on the project, sometimes they have a director and a showrunner. It just happened to be I was both. So I'm overseeing the teams, but also having to give the decision, like what are we going to put here and there, and what is the trajectory of the narrative going to be. So in a way, I feel like our industry's shifting so much, we have to shift and grow with it as well, and hold on, to our seats while we do it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it is a particularly challenging time in the industry with the contractions that are happening, again, from the streamers and just in general, across the filmmaking community, both
yes,
and scripted narrative and us. So again, many of us have, some of us we have been used to piecing it together and kind of doing it this indie way the whole time, and others are new to it. But so, Robinder, I just want to ask you real quick before we jump to all the audience questions. talk about you. How have you been sustaining yourself? Like how did you, first of all, as a producer, like how did you get into it? And then how have you been sustaining yourself in this environment?
Yeah, that's it's a tough one, right? It's been hard. I think I got into producing like a lot of people. I wanted to make films, and I was a director, and realized that there was this whole other side of filmmaking that I had sort of ignored that was vital, and have been learning that work, and I'm still obviously learning. It's a lifelong thing to learn how to produce, like Lawrence was saying. In terms of sustainability, I think one of the techniques that I've used is doing different jobs on projects, and not. I mean, I have been a post-production supervisor. I edit. I shoot. I've done many years of captioning, transcriptions. I mean, lots of different tasks that are budgeted for. That I think part of it is frugality, unfortunately, and doing what you can to stretch the money that you have, and again, being realistic about how long films take is also important. I'm also very lucky. I'm working with Firelight as a supervising producer for a series in a part-time role, and that also helps sustain. And I think so many other filmmakers also work for entities beyond just their own indie filmmaking practice. And it's just piecing it together.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's really great. And we're gonna switch over now to audience questions. And thanks to everyone who pre-submitted questions. So we're gonna answer some now. So we have a question from someone who says, I'm a director. My question is how to maximize the director-producer relationship. When you're doing so much as a director-producer on your personal indie doc, how do you effectively share or pass on tasks once you bring a producer on board, specifically on a BIPOC story? I think this is a really great question because for many of us who do it alone, suddenly if you do have the resources to bring someone on, you're like, how do I delegate? How do I share? How do I do this? So I'd love to hear from any of you in this position.
I just have a thought on this one, and I think maybe the most important thing is to step back, and I think it's easy to wait too long to bring on a producer as a director, and that makes the question a lot harder to answer. How do you actually share and pass on tasks? Well, if you're a year in and you've got a whole language and a way of working, and you know what your film is going to be, it's going to be a lot harder to pass it on at that point. So I would say as soon as you can get someone else who could be your producer, start that relationship early. And I'm sure Nicole and Lawrence both have ideas about this, but that's just one thing that's gnawing at me.
Yeah, and also in the hiring process, you should find someone that has a complementary skill set, right? Like you might not be as strong raising money. You might not want to do some of that, right? So then you would find a producer that is good at that stuff. So it's also realizing what your strengths are and what you want to do and what you want to focus on, and finding a good partner in that way. So it's not as hard to delegate, but you really are working together in these own separate spaces. And then also open communication. It's often just myself and a director on a project for years and years, and DPs and editors come and go. And you just need to make sure that you have similar creative visions and that you're able to have that open environment to express that stuff. If you are afraid of being judged, or you really need to have like a good connection to make the project the best that it can be.
Thank you both for that. Those are great answers. And I want to move on just because there's a bunch of questions. So here's one that's hard because it's specific. How do you budget your pre-production development fee when you're going the indie route and working on getting funding at the same time? What do you all suggest? You've stumped. Everyone is stumped.
I know there's like a zillion answers. Well, you can always keep it real, like, okay, how much do you need, the month to make your month? But what you can seriously do is, bite it off in chunks, like especially if you're working with someone and raising funds. That's how you can say, quote unquote, come up with a day rate or weekly rate, something that you can at least budget that is reasonable but can sustain you. So you can actually do the work. Like if you need to write the treatments or get a step further, that's always been the hardest. Like, I've always had to work to get to that next step on something else. But if you're obviously working, you're working. And so they're paying you to do their film, not yours. So that has always been the biggest challenge. Come up with a number. I would say, reasonable, like there are reasonable day rates that people are suggesting around, or weekly rates depending on the market that you live in, and then come up with at least a couple weeks or however many weeks you think it's going to take you to do that work, and then that could at least be phase one, part one, and then part two is, okay, now I have to do maybe shoot the sizzle or do this or that or edit some of this or that, that's going to be another budget, and the editor is going to say need to be paid. Or if you're really editing your own sizzle, well, then put that down. That's still a line item, an editor, a director and a producer and a writer, if you will. So at least have those line items there, because when you do get those grants or you go apply for those grants that really want those detailed numbers, you've already started thinking that through versus like, well, I'm doing it all, so I'll just put in a few this there or a few hundred here or there, make it a real budget. And there's tons of budget templates, online that I've used, and, even you can ask your colleagues, but I would recommend get a budget template, because then that'll also help you keep in mind all the line items and also help you on the journey. That's right. I'm going to need this in pre-production. Oh my gosh, I'm actually going to need this during production. Oh, wow. I'm going to need, X, Y, and Z when we're editing and post and finishing and mixing and all that. So having a budget template, if you don't have one already, if you really are just bare bones trying to put some structure to things, that is a good way as well, because it helps kind of focus you and anchor you on what you should be thinking about. And here are some line items that will eventually need to be filled in.
Okay, thank you for that. And then here's another question. What are some of the gatekeeping experiences you had that you hope that other BIPOC producers can be made aware of? Is there a specific experience where you realized you needed to share this information with others? That's tricky, but one of the questions.
I guess in terms of when you're talking to certain entities regarding distribution, it's not like code, but there are like some key words I think that you can be aware of, that it's like your BIPOC story isn't kind of what they're looking for. And it might be like, we need something that's a character-driven way into an issue, which is like a big way to broaden. They're looking for a specific thing that's not what you've got. I don't know. It's hard to come up with concrete examples because there is all this coded language that's used, but you just have to like read people's cues and hear what they're not saying.
I can add one here. I could add something to this, which is the term niche. It's too niche. Like if something, and there's always this concept of like, we need something that takes big swings, and this is very niche.
What's the audience for that? Can it reach the different countries that we are distributed in?
Yeah. So these are some, I think, in thinking about funding, and thinking about who you're dealing with. The idea of how do you explain to the challenges, how do you explain to folks who, again, already come with their implicit and sometimes explicit biases, that this is something that people will watch. I mean, we all know if you like build the table, they will come, right? But folks will obviously come. But, I think that's one of something I would say. I don't know, Lorenzo or Robinder, if you have anything else.
Yeah, I think it's, one of the challenges of just being a BIPOC person in this industry is on the one hand, the gatekeeping in that direction, and then on the other, the expectation that you'll do something that is sort of in your lane, ethnically, that's what you should be making films about. Not that it's a great film, but that, is it just reflecting you on screen? And I think, that works, and that's great when people want to make those films, but I think the expectation that everyone who's BIPOC is going to want to make a film about being BIPOC, and have that identity be the main thing that gets them that work is also stifling. So, and that can happen. Happens a lot.
It does. And then here's another question. The strongest producers have systems and structure for the production process, especially in scripted projects. With documentary work, can you walk us through the process of how a producer can start strong and finish strong, especially for doc producers who are just starting out? Do you have like some key things that, would help on the journey?
I would, look at it in phases, or, it's not just one blur. There really is a pre-production, a production, and a post, and a finishing or distribution, and you're going to need different skill sets, whether you have them or not. Producing, you go find them. Like, distribution's coming at some point, so start building those relationships if you don't have it. Post is going to come. Maybe a post house already. Start making your deals. If you're on a particular budget, that's what the producing work can do. So you're not feeling like, oh my God, we start post next week, and we don't even know where we're going. That kind of thing. I mean, that's an extreme example, but that's how, I think the hardest part to learn about producing, I guess I would say, is anticipation. Because you don't know what's coming up, but once you've done it, then because it's gonna knock you off your knock the wind out of your sails sometimes. So that is probably the best, and the way to get prepared is to start on you need to staff. How are we going to staff it? What is your budget? Get the people who's going to crunch the numbers if you're not going to crunch them. Start getting your deals, wheeling and dealing. And also producing is relationships. The rapport building is, I also think, sort of just unseen, but sort of the basis for all of it. Building a rapport with either the sources that are going to be interviewed, whether the location that you're going to use, the editor or post facility that you're going to work with, the distributors, or the, all of that. It's all rapport building. And the director should be focusing on making the film, while the producer, if there are two people to do that, that is what a producer can really lean into, really building those relationships and building that rapport and staying in touch with people. Because sometimes if you're doing it all, that's one thing. It's like, oh my God, I got to go check in with so-and-so. I haven't talked to them in months, but I'm slammed because I'm busy doing the trailer or the X, Y, or Z. That's how a producer can help you, to keep you on, just on task and keeping up with people, because everybody's got feelings, everyone's, and that's always, every time I start a project, I always feel like, oh, well, I was wondering where, I worked on something before and I never heard from them again, or it took them forever to get back to me, or they took my family photos and never returned them. I mean, my goodness, please and thank you also. Just, that's so simple. Just remember that as well. And then that, saves, the next person, and saves you just so much grief, just because you need to be on it. You need to be task oriented, but also just please and thank you, and building those rapports will really get you through.
And this actually brings me to the next question. So speaking of rapport, can you just, I think, talk about the dynamics between director and producer? What principles or boundaries make a strong dynamic between these two roles? What would you say? Like, what have been your most successful, I think, experiences, or like what have been when you look for a director to work with as a producer, or vice versa?
I think Nicole mentioned, just getting to know the person and really making sure that there's a connection, I think, is the most important thing, a strong connection between the producer and the director. I think knowing, the background of this person and sort of how they work is really important. Having a clear understanding of what the relationship is going to be, papering it, I would say that's one thing that, relates to the previous question as well, is get contracts for all the different phases and for all the different people on your film. Don't work as though it's on handshake agreements, because it's better for you and it's better for everyone else, and it's just a matter of professionalizing. I think sometimes people still try to work with without contracting, especially when they're starting out, and that it doesn't lead to good dynamics. Yeah, I don't know if Nicole or Lawrence has more to add about the director-producer dynamic.
Nicole, do you have anything?
I mean, I always like to ask who I'm working with, like what their preferred methods of communication are. Like some people are better over email. Some people just want to text. People will slide into your DMs. I'm like, just give me the, just give me the one thing that you prefer and are most efficient with, so we can, build off of, instead of building a whole new system. And also like the experience working with first-time directors, with, experienced producers often get paired with first-time directors because they just need to. It's a very different experience than working with like a veteran director, and knowing that you're up for that and that you have the language and the tools to be able to, bring this creative language out of your director, and that director is open to that, right? So again, I just go to open and honest communication. Like, how do you like to work? And what tools do you like to use? And it just makes everything out in the open instead of guessing, because we all work a little different.
That's incredibly helpful. Okay, I have one last question before we have to end. But who is your mentor, if you had one? And what is something that you took from them that you always remember, that you always apply? What is the one thing? What is your Jedi code for producing? Lorenz, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Gosh, so many things come to mind.
Keep it short, just because we have only a little time.
Make it happen and take deep breaths.
That's a good one. Is that it?
And I had lots of mentors. Since this was with Firelight, of course, I've worked with Stanley Nelson and Marsha Smith, so they've been, great mentors. And through my career, interestingly, I had few women mentors. So a shout out to them that I did work with, because this is a male space. It has been predominantly white male space for so long. So, and some of them were mentors. You don't know where mentorship can come from. So I would also be open to where a mentorship and an opportunity can come from. It may seem left field, but that left field can actually take you straight ahead to where you want to go. Lean into your resources. But if you're going to be in the producing path, I've always told interns and APs, this industry is not for the weak stomached. So that's why you need to find out, the self-care. Whether you need your yoga, retreats, cappuccinos, wine, whatever you need to get yourself through the day and then unwind the day. I find like that's probably been the hardest for me, the unwinding part, because, films, I think if you're really into it and really value your craft, it's not something you shut off. It is in your bones, and making good films, you have to open yourself up to the world around you, because that's where you could get a thought, an idea. The pitter patter of the water from the faucet dropping can give you an idea and inspiration to the composer that you're going to work with. So that's why it's, you need to take the deep breaths, but you want to be open to the world around you, so you can put in the most creativity in the films that you're working on.
And so Nicole, do you have anything? I'm sorry, it has to
really
be short.
quick.
We have a little time.
Just set your boundaries and build your network, because you never know who knows who, and you can just rely on your network for all the questions.
And Robinder?
Film is like a marriage in a lot of ways, so be very careful about who you're going down that path with, and protect yourself when you can.
That sounds. And any mentors to mention?
so many great people, Richard Lackman, Bob Moore recently, and just, yeah, lots of great people who've mentored me over the years.
Nicole?
Diane Kwan, Bob Moore is another one. Yeah,
Beautiful.
just learning from everyone. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so I want to thank today's panelists for their real talk today. This is it sheds light on how we might think about strengthening and uplifting the work of BIPOC producers. And to learn more about Firelight Media and our panelists, and to see more Beyond Resilience conversations like this one, you can visit firelightmedia.tv and have a really great evening, everyone. And again, thank you all so much for your wisdom.
Thank you.